Church of God Network podcast, everybody. I'm here today with Kennard Brown and James Navarro, two good friends of mine. And I say that having only met James once and having never met Kennard, but still we talk enough to still cross that threshold of good friends. Hopefully we can all get together in person sometime soon.
Sure.
But we're here to talk today about a pretty sensitive issue in the Church of God, and that is one of race and how it has affected the Church of God over time, how it still affects the Church of God. The experience of people in different communities, both in and outside the church. It's something that I know I personally didn't realize the magnitude of the issue until the last year or two when certain good friends of mine brought it up to me. I thank them for opening up. And Kennard and James have been gracious enough to come on and talk about it. So without further ado, I'll let them talk a bit about their own backgrounds. They're two very accomplished guys. And you'll see as they introduce themselves, but perhaps Kennard first. Tell us a bit about your church background when you came in, and a bit about your professional background.
Sure. God started calling me back when I was 17 years old. I was attending St. Rita High School in Chicago, Illinois, and I took about 4 years of theology there. And I didn't know that was going to play a role in what I'm doing now, but it did. And my mom, she picked up a Plain Truth magazine and she just gave it to me. And I start reading it and I'm like, man, this makes sense, And then one of the things that I struggled with was the doctrine of the immortal soul, because, Catholics, that's one of their top doctrines. And I struggled with that. And I realized, hey, I can't deny Ezekiel chapter 18 says the soul that sins, it shall die. And Mr. Armstrong, he just hammered that through my skull, basically, when I was reading his literature that was Bible based. So I said, hey, but I was 17 at the time, and I think God really intensified the call after I graduated. So after I graduated
You're based out of Chicago, right?
Yeah, Chicago, Illinois. Yeah, Chicago,
Yep.
Illinois. And he intensified the call after that. And I was going to the University of Illinois at Chicago for 2 years, and he really intensified the call to the point where I had family issues, and my family didn't understand why I'm in this kooky religion and so forth. And so it got to the point where, my dad said, hey, you're going to have to make a choice. Either you give up the religion and start keeping Sunday, or at least celebrate Christmas, because I don't understand why you don't want to celebrate Christmas, or you go with your cult and you have your cult folks pick you up and start your life there. And so I chose the latter. And so I had this poor family from Gary, Indiana, come and pick me up. And I began my adult life at age 21 with practically no money in my bank account. I had me a little part-time job working at the University of Illinois. I'm still trying to go to school. My dad was helping me out with that. He cut the help off there, and because of the religious disagreements. And it was tough. It was really tough. And what kept me going was Matthew chapter 6. Toward the end of it, seek you first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to. I don't know. I think I may have gone over that every day, going through the trials that I was going through.
And the irony is that you have like a bunch of degrees now, right? I mean, how many degrees?
Yeah. So God ordered me, and let's talk about the good news. So that's why I talk about the bad news first and show you what God did for me, because He does promise when you forsake mothers, fathers, whatever, He's going to bless you in this life. And sometimes I forget that He'll bless you in this life, not just the next one, but in this life. And so He did. Let me show you. And this is not bragging. This is what God has done through little old me. All right. And so I originally pursued a degree in computer science, and that got all messed up because of the religious squabbles with my dad. And so what happened is that I was able to get a bachelor's arts degree in management. And then I was able to get a master's degree in marketing. And then I got a doctorate degree in business administration and a master's degree in IT. And I'm teaching for Purdue University, their global division. It's a prestigious college. So this is what God has done for me. All right. And He'll do that.
I want to make sure you bragged a bit. Like
I'm bragging.
I'm
not bragging,
Brown.
I'm showing that God can work miracles, and He is not a liar. And if you do what I did anyone. I don't care who you are, what color you are, what you look like, what gender, he's going to reward you. Okay. And I'm a living example of it. And I still have trials. I still have problems. But in addition to that, I'm still amazed, and I never thought that I would be a minister, but that happened in a weird way that I'm writing about, in addition to that, I own a digital marketing agency. It's all remote. And then I teach for Purdue University, and also I tutor student athletes from Texas Christian University. And I really get on the football team now because you know what's going on with the football this year. They're not doing as well. So anyway.
When I start scouting players for the NFL draft, if there's anyone from ECU that I want the inside scoop on, I'll let you know, Kennard. But
I can find out.
One last thing though, you also have a ministry, right? Merciful Servants.
Yeah, Merciful Servants of God, right? And I've had that. That's another story altogether. But I what happened was that this is unique too. I got kicked out of the Philadelphia Church of God. Gerald
I forgot you were in Philadelphia for a while.
Yeah, I was in Philadelphia, right? When that debacle happened in 1995 with Joseph Ducat Sr., I didn't know where to go. And so I said, okay, I guess maybe God wants me to start my own ministry, and I started in March of 2004. And I've gotten a lot of experience in ministry. I got into the Hebrew Roots movement, and I found out that is a discombobulation, basically. And there's some good people, though. There's some good people that actually believe what we believe in the Hebrew Roots. Mm-hmm. It's not that many, but there are some. But the majority of them, they bring in Sunday elements into it to the point of where it perverts what they're trying to do, live by the word of God. And so I had to leave that. And then from there, I started getting back. Well, let me get back to my roots. Let me get back and try to associate with some splinter churches that are actually sane. You know what I mean by that? Okay. And so my goal, really, the vision of my ministry is to try to work together and be unified on the things that we do agree, because there's many things that we do agree about. And I think the biggest thing with my ministry is that I prefer to go in more to the Hebrew part of it, not in a fanatical way, but in a way to understand the scriptures better. So that's
Kennard and Merciful Servants of God are big allies for unity.
Certainly, I would be lying to say I'm not a Church of God, splinter church, because I am.
Yeah. So you're a big advocate for unity, and it's much appreciated. Yeah. But so James, how about you? Someone of equal accomplishment. I'll brag for you guys if you're not going to do it yourself. But James, tell us a bit about your background.
Sure. Well, I came into the church back in the early 1980s, and it was with Worldwide Church of God. I was baptized February 11th, 1986, and continued growing in the church from that point to this date. I'm now in the United Church of God. As far as my background, I'm licensed by the state of California. I own a company called Wiseman Construction and Remodeling Incorporated. I've been in this industry 20 years as a licensed contractor, 45 years in the industry overall. And I am presently on contract with the state of California, where I come in and I create tests for general contractors, those that want to be licensed general contractors. Myself, along with 3 other contractors, we come in and on the times they need us, and then we create these tests to kind of go through and sieve out, people who don't really have the real experience, because, sometimes that goes on out there. People will, sign for other people, maybe not always being truthful about their experience. So this is how we kind of weed them out with these tests made at the home office. That's part of what I do. That's me in a nutshell.
Awesome.
And I forgot to mention that, I was baptized October 19th. It's the same year you were, but it's October 1986.
It was a good year.
Mr. Ronald Lock.
But the Giants won the Super Bowl that year, so that's holds a big place in my heart. But and also, James, another factor is perhaps we could have gotten your wife to host a podcast instead of me. Yeah. She works for the London School of Economics, which is really prestigious, and she hosts a podcast. So a whole lot of interesting background between these two guys and their families. But on that front, to get down to the core of it, we've been talking a lot as we've been planning the podcast about trying to communicate to folks in the church the extent to which race played a part in the interactions in the church? To what extent did it cause issues? Because as we know, for any issue, if it's in the world, it's going to creep into the church,
Yes.
and probably to an equal extent, right? It's part of the human struggle, is navigating things and attitudes. And I know from my own experience that there are some folks who sort of have some rose-colored glasses views of the church as it is now, or the way it used to be on the part of, or on the side of the racial issues. Not to paint everyone with a broad brush in this conversation, but I think sharing experiences is something we care a lot about at Church of God Network. And so we want to start off doing that with you two. So perhaps James first, if you could tell us a bit about what it was like coming into the church and being in the church as a Latino man.
Well, thank you for asking that question, Dan. Back in the 1980s, I was, in my early 20s, and at that time, or later 20s, mid 20s, sorry, I wasn't raised in the church, but while I came into the church, one of my experiences that made me see that, wait a minute, maybe things are a little bit different here in this perspective. I felt that I was adhering to God's calling, coming amongst my fellow brethren, sharing with them, growing with them. But in this period of time before I was baptized, I attended what they called an international day, and that was held in Oakland, California at that time. It was the San Francisco area church at that time. In any respect, I came to attend. They had a dance. Everybody was supposed to dress in their international garb and come and enjoy the festivities with each other, which was great. But I looked around the room, and I was single at that time, by the way. And in any respect, I looked around for people to dance with. And I looked over in the corner of the hall, and I noticed there was Black ladies that were in the corner by themselves that nobody was asking to dance. And so I thought, I'm going to go over and ask him to dance. So I did. And I started dancing with him, having a great time, fellowship, And at one point, I then broke off to go to the restroom because I was sweating because I love to dance. So as I was wetting down my face to get rid of some of the perspiration, as I look up in the mirror, there's these two men standing behind me in, suits and very nice, and said to me, "Can we ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." They said, "What church area are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from San Jose. Why, what's going on?" And they said, "Well, are you a baptized member?" And I said, "Well, not just yet. I'm being counseled for it though." And kind of was curious of why they were asking me that.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, they said, "Well, we need to talk to you about something." And I said, "What is it?" And they said, "Well, you've been dancing with the African American ladies, and it's our policy not to do that." And I said, "What?" They said, "Yeah, we don't encourage that. Uh, that you shouldn't be doing that." And I said, "Really? Well, why?" They said, "Well, when you get back, to your home, San Jose area, speak to your local minister about that, and they could probably better explain it to you."
Just as an interjection right there,
Yeah.
that statement is something that very much bothers me. Like, they should have been able to, if it's policy and something they believe, they should have been able to tell you themselves. And I
Right.
don't mean to make a joke, but maybe it's because they were jealous how good you were at dancing. I mean, you said, like, you
Yeah.
messaged me on Facebook and you're like, I was like a champion dancer back in the day. So maybe they were jealous, but in all seriousness, like, you go on and continue.
Yeah.
I didn't interrupt.
Yeah, there could have been a mixture of that because I do love to dance, like I say. But in
Yeah.
any respect, anybody who knows me personally knows that. But in any respect, I wasn't trying to be rebellious, but it didn't sit right with me. Not as far as even truth before God. Not for me. Not for me. I said, I don't think God wants us to look at each other that way. But in any respect, I went back in there and I went right back to them and asked them to dance, only because I felt what the gentlemen were asking me was, truly wrong. And at the point, I wasn't baptized, but I said, well, if there's more truth they're going to tell me later about this, I'll figure it out then. But tonight, I'm going to still fellowship with my brethren. I'm going to ask these ladies to dance because nobody was asking them.
Mhm.
Um, that was one in a various amount of experience as to what I just said. As I was being counseled, this was before, then I move over to being counseled, had a wonderful man who was counseling me at the time. And before getting baptized, we had our private discussions. And he said to me, "James, we've been observing you. And we think that it'll be okay if you date white American women." Okay. And at that point, I said, "What?" He said, yes, we feel that it would be okay if you date white American women. We've been observing you for a
Oh,
while. And so my question to him at the time was, okay, well, first of all, Mr. So-and-so, um, I didn't ask permission, but then number two, why is this? And he kind of had a kind of a dumbfounded look for a minute. And then I said, I have a question to ask you. I said, I'm going to get baptized soon, right? He says, yes, yes. I said, and you're white American, aren't you? He says, yes. And I said, I'm Latin American. He says, yes. I said, so when I get baptized, will I receive God's spirit in lesser measure than you because you're white? And he said, no. I said, then why is there a difference then if I interact with people of other cultures, whether they be black or Asian or any culture, any culture outside of white, why is that a problem? He said, James, I don't make the rules, but this is something I needed to talk to you about. So these were, true, strong experiences. And, I've known of others, but these are my personal experiences. And then I started to research it and look a little bit more. And I realized this was a common thread going throughout the church, not only locally at the congregation I was at, it was in other areas. Why? Because we go to fellowship and I would talk with other people. And it wasn't just something in my mind. I didn't feel like, oh, they're just singling me out. It was a general statement where people knew that. They did not encourage interracial dating. They did not encourage you even dancing with another culture due to the fact that, I guess they figured you might develop feelings. I don't know. But it was quite it was a hard experience to go through because you know what? You figure you came into God's church, He gave you a calling. It's about His Spirit. Your brothers and sisters are in the church, are there to grow with you for the future coming kingdom of God, where we're going to be spirit beings. We're not going to be flesh. We're not going to be Latin. We're not going to be black. We're not going to be white. It's going to be a matter of having God's Spirit, being God's children. And this is the direction I thought we were moving forward to. But there was a glass ceiling that wasn't always like told you harshly, but you knew it was there. And that's just the way it was told. And there was so many other stories. I traveled around the world like others, on the feast, and people would speak about this experience of feeling a little bit singled out or discluded, not included in certain things because of our race at that time.
Yeah, and I think there was definitely the implicit nature of those things, not necessarily maybe explicit, like you said, a cap on what you could do or how far you could advance with it. And I think also very much depended on your local minister and how much they wanted to emphasize it. The thing I think is worth highlighting too is that, number one, this still exists in the Church of God. It might not be as prevalent, it might not be as systemic, but it still does exist. I've known quite a few people who have similar experiences, specifically around the dances for some reason. My dad tells a story of, this is back in the day, this isn't recent, but in the 80s as well, taking someone who was like his church mom, right? So she's 40 years older than him, but she's a elderly Black woman. And he was going to Spokesman's Club graduation and he wasn't dating anyone. So he wanted to take her like as a nice gesture. And he got flack from his minister because he was white and she was Black. And it didn't clearly this is not a romantic thing. And also the minister in that case was Black. So it's one of those things where it permeated the culture. It wasn't necessarily overtly racist. That's not what we're trying to say. But there was this there was a belief about what scripture said about certain things that we took from speculation and made it policy. And I think there were a lot of unintended consequences for that. And it, to your point, James, made people feel singled out. And I think people need to acknowledge the damage that those things can do long term, because people put up with a lot, like yourself and Kennard, and just in general, people, because I think we were all so excited about being in the church and the work the church was doing, especially back then, that we sort of turned a blind eye to certain things. I know one of the things that my dad talks about was being told you have to get rid of all your rock records when you come into the church, right? And he's like, well, I didn't get rid of my records, but I know a lot of people who did, who just tossed everything out the next day. And you got to admire the zeal to be able to sort of take this stuff on the chin, unfortunately, and continue with the body of people for the sake of unity. But also we have to recognize that we shouldn't be putting these stumbling blocks in front of folks. And before we get to Kennard, to your point, James, maybe the three of us could riff on the fact that it seems like the two things folks cite as defending this policy is that God set the bounds of the nations, that's scripture, and that the admonitions to Israel to not marry people outside the nation of different faiths specifically. But before I even give my opinion on it, what say you, maybe James first, because it was your story, and then Kennard, about those two particular scriptural citations that people use?
One of the things I feel about that, when God was speaking to the nations and the people, remember, there was a concern about, marrying outside of the faith and people of, pagan worship or other things. Look at, it's go so far as that. Look at Solomon, what he did, so in any respect, it was in those bounds of staying within the faith. But when you go back in time and you look at everything, look through the scriptures in Hebrews, Colossians, you can go all over and you'll find where God speaks about, even in Hebrews, what does it say? It is no longer circumcision of the flesh, but of the heart, whereby we all cry, Abba, Father. So I think that was taken out of context, and we have to look back in history. We could probably look for things or messages that were given in the archives that maybe they just might not have been totally factual. So that's my take on that. God never intended that. And again, we're going to be spirit beings. We're not going to be of any race. There will be no more marrying in the kingdom of God. And we're going to be there to help people in the future who come out of the millennium. And we're not going to be segregated. I just want to share this point too. In current date, there are ministers that I know that this did exist. They're friends of mine. We talk. Now, they're not saying it like, yeah. No, they're saying, yes, we know it did exist. It did happen. There's one minister I know personally that he actually went a little bit through that because, quote unquote, he's considered to be interracial. It's not black with white, but it's a mixture of another culture. And he actually got frowned upon too. So did it exist? Yes. Is it correct? I don't believe so. Is there something we can do now for the future? I believe that wholeheartedly. I think that's why we're talking today, to approach this from a position of love for our fellow brethren. But let's identify that a lot of people have been hurt in the church, including myself. We move forward. We love our fellow brethren, white to black, Asian, you name it, whatever culture. We love them. But I think this is an issue that we need to look at and look at it correctly now.
And correct going forward. We don't want to
yes, sir.
Keep hold of problematic policies or not learn from the experiences of folks. That's sort of all the topics we cover on the podcast, whether it's addiction, mental health related things, race. Like, it's to open up a discussion on things to learn and sort of help folks. There are a lot of people in the Church of God that need help, and a segment of those folks are trying to get past experiences recent or decades ago regarding race that are still hard to reconcile. So Kennard, before I throw it to you for some of your experiences in the church, any thoughts on those scriptural defenses people have for? I saw you.
Sure. And without being very strict, you need to study your Bible a little bit more in detail. There's in Deuteronomy, there's a Torah commandment where when they're fighting a war, if they find a woman that they're attracted to, that if she chooses, she could, become his wife. The greatest prophet, one of the greatest prophets who ever lived, Moses, he married outside his tribe, right? Ethiopian, Joseph. And then I think the scripture, matter of fact, I know in the book of Ezra, I think it's toward the end of the book of Ezra. Remember when they had married paganistic women? And they were told to divorce them? It wasn't because of their tribe or their skin color. It was because of their religion. That's what he was concerned about. So that's the proper biblical understanding of that when you compare it with those other scriptures. Okay, sure, he wants variety, but there are cases where there's nothing wrong with marrying someone of a different type of human race. We're all one race, but there's different varieties of that race, just like with a flower. There's different varieties of flowers. He loves that. And so
Yeah.
we got to get into God's paradigm instead of the devil's paradigm of separation and division.
I agree. And I think it's important to note that when someone outside the nation of Israel wanted to become part of the nation of Israel, and by extension their faith, that they were to be treated like a native born. So that's it's the same dynamic in the church. That's the whole point about the Gentiles coming in and Israel being regrafted, and if the Gentiles can be grafted in. But also the logical extension about God setting the bounds of the nations, therefore we shouldn't marry outside them, would apply beyond race. It wouldn't be a racial issue. It would be, my dad's Italian, my mom's French. They shouldn't have gotten married. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you make perfect sense there.
It's sort of like an arbitrary boundary there. But without belaboring that too long, Kennard, what do you? How about you? What's your experience as a Black man in the Church of God? Tell us a bit about your history and experiences.
And one more thing I wanted to add, which is very important. There was a mixed multitude in the wilderness. So I just wanted to hit it with that. All right. So my experience as a Black, it was originally good. I mean, when I was, I attended the Southside congregation in Hammond, Indiana. And it was like, God promised that he would give you another mother. And even though my mother still stuck with me, but it was difficult because of the religious thing, but she still loved me and I loved her and all that. And I love my dad too, but it was a strength. But anyway, he gave me father figures and mother figures, grandmothers and all that, spiritual, and for a time it was nice. I mean, it was nice. People cared about me and so forth. There were plenty of Blacks to fellowship with, but there were some girls and they didn't have the same skin color that I have to admit I was attracted to, but because of the church's policies, and this is before I met my wife, of course, I couldn't do anything. And I could tell there was frustration there, not just with me, but other people in that environment. And it's tough enough to find a mate in the world. But when you're in the church, it makes it so much harder because, it's not as many people. And because of that, we got to understand that we have to view each other as a spiritual organism, not the skin color. We have to view each other as the children of God, no matter what skin color we are. And if we can do that, then that'll minimize the frustration. You know what I'm talking about, the type of frustration I'm talking about. And that will avoid being tempted to go and marry someone outside. And I'm not giving any names here, but from one of the splinter churches, I've heard a minister tell me that why don't people just marry someone from the world, to prevent being tempted to, fornicate. And I'm like, I don't think that's a very wise thing to do. I know in some situations, even the Bible, that happened, but there are exceptional situations. And the preference, of course, is to marry someone that believes what you believe, because that would be, you're going to have problems enough being married, but they're going to be aggravated more if you don't believe. If your wife celebrates Christmas and you don't, then it's going to be conflict constantly over and over and over again. So it's best to marry someone of your own religion. And that's a conflict. That didn't really happen too much back during the time when I was in my 20s, but now I hear that why don't you marry someone from, and that's not, I don't think that's good advice for any minister.
Just to avoid like the interracial thing you're saying too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That you got hit on the nose there, and that's unfortunate. So it's satanic, folks. I have to just call it what it is. Just because somebody is a different color, then you avoid them or whatever. And I even sense that today when I go to certain, and I'm not giving any congregational names, but when I go to certain congregations, you have cliques, you have the whites over in the corner, and you have, it shouldn't be that way, and I know in other congregations it's not like that, but other congregations it is, and it shouldn't be in any congregation, so that's
on that front too. I think what folks might not realize is it could be unintentional, because there are a lot of human tendencies just to like associate people who are similar to you in a bunch of different ways.
That's natural.
I think we need to take a step back and realize the impression that gives, though. Like oh,
Mhm.
well, I haven't fellowshiped with anyone who is of my race in a while. You know what I mean? Like it's not it might be unintentional, but we have to be introspective and
Mhm.
realize the impact that might have
Yeah, the
on
appearance.
other
Yeah, yeah.
people. Yeah.
So and so we could, we're not perfect. None of us are perfect. None of us on this video call is perfect, but we just need to work on that and view each other as, again, in a spiritual type of way, instead of looking at the skin color and saying, "Oh, okay, maybe I need to treat this person different because of their skin color." And then James chapter 2, we got a whole chapter on favoritism, most of it anyway, about favoritism and so forth, and we got to eliminate that. That's certainly not of God at all. So,
Yeah. And
so that's my view, and then I was fortunate enough to meet my wife, and the way that happened, they had an all black dance there, because at the time still they were teaching that, and so
it was explicitly
yes, all
about,
black people, yeah, all black people at this, and it was
Hmm.
I didn't think I was going to meet my wife. I thought it was a possibility,
Yeah.
but I met my wife there, and and they were single, and so they were all single, young adults, and the purpose of it, really, they said, well, the fellowship, but it should be also the purpose of finding a
Yeah.
compatible mate too. I mean, it's so tough to do that outside of the church, of course. The chances of someone being drawn in because of what you're doing, I know it's happened a few times, and so but I was fortunate enough to meet my wife at this, and it was very good that they did that, and I'm sure other people probably got married because of that event too. And
Definitely
I
makes
think it was
it.
about 300, 400 blacks there at the
It does make it uncomfortable though when it's
hmm.
singled out as like a blacks only dance. That's
Yeah, yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
odd
Looking
dynamic.
back on it now, yeah, that was the only bad thing about it. It
Yeah.
should have been just a single event, but see, they were teaching at that time incorrectly that if you're black, marry black, white, marry white.
Yeah.
You
And there's a
know,
lot
and
of
so
extensions of those things too that I've come across over the last few years
mhm,
where, and again, I think it's so um individualized to your area, the people in that area, your
mhm,
minister, whatever. Um, I've, apparently one of the wasn't so much a doctrine, but like a belief that permeated the church, at least
mhm.
certain folks, was that uh, like blacks would go back to Africa during the millennium and they'd be over Africa in terms of, yeah, it's just like
Right.
it's needless speculation
Mhm,
at best, and at worst you're like, again, you have this tinged uh statement that makes it sound, again, like you're separating people arbitrarily, like you're going to go back there. I've had friends tell me they were told by people, you should go to the islands or Africa for the feast to find a woman. I'm like, man, do you not know how that sounds? Like,
Well,
go ahead, James.
sorry, just to interject on that point, I think that's a strong point too, because in this perspective, yes, you can go to Africa and you're going to find, black people, and yes, you can go to Mexico and you're going to find Latin people. But I think one of the things we need to look at is what are we doing here in the U.S. What are we doing in our own country? What are we doing to be represented in that perspective? And
right.
if you look back at, and I say this in love, if you just look throughout your own local congregations, just look around and tell me what you see. So a part of that is that all I'm saying is that I think here in our own country, we can do more to promote representation, whether it's in the ministry, whether it's in elders, whether it's in sermons. There's a lot of things that I'm just saying that we need to, maybe try to be a little bit better represented in that perspective. We don't need to go to Africa or Mexico and let's take pictures over there and then put in our magazine that it's just kind of we're helping them as the brethren there. It's locally, what are we doing? Where are we in the magazines? Where are we in ministry? So these are just some things I'm bringing out, and I'm saying in love. So I hear what you're saying, but I just don't think we have to go to foreign countries. And as a church, we have the ability to do this. One thing I'll say, and I'll final it on this note, is that when we all came from the worldwide and we went to our splinter groups, everybody went somewhere, right? So even if you had other splinter groups that came later, some of that mentality and thinking from before just kind of moved on over to the various churches. So did it get worked out or not? I don't know. Was it tradition that was taught to some of the people in the church? You still got what was happening from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And then we split up in 1995, and then everybody goes different directions. Where did everybody in those positions of leadership go? And
Mhm.
could it have just been innocently just gone ahead and just transferred into, again, the splinter group? So
Yeah.
I think that's something to consider, and I think we're just here to discuss it today on a level of it's existed before, it's still here now, but we want to move forward in love and fellowship and figure out how you can understand those of us who went through it and that we're still here and what we need to do to grow with you. Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing too on that front is even just the asking of the question. For example, like, because I think a lot of different splitter groups have different um, makeups in terms of age related, ethnicity related.
Mhm.
Um, and to a certain degree, you'd expect, variation just based on random chance of where people went. But I think it should, if you are in a congregation in an area of the country where there's a lot of diversity and there isn't much in the congregation, that becomes okay. Well, that statistically you wouldn't think that would be the case. Or if you look at the ministry as a whole and you see an underrepresentation as compared to what might happen just by chance, then asking the question, well, why is that the case? Is there something going on? Like, is there a reason more people of a certain race went with this group rather than that group? It feels like it's worth understanding, even if the conclusion might be, okay, it wasn't driven by racism, maybe it was something else. Having, like, being curious about it should at least be happening. You know what I mean? It should prompt a question of, why isn't there that much diversity? Is there something we can do to be in communication with those communities? Maybe there's a bit of information we're missing, a perspective we're not seeing. More information never hurt anyone, I don't think. But so on that front, maybe to transition to the next one, we've talked about a couple issues that are important. We talked about dating and marriage interracially in the church. We've referenced representation a bit here. The maybe the biblical views or verses used to promote some of this, but I know there were a couple issues that we all talked about in the planning calls that are topics of points of frustration, not only for us, but for other people I've talked to, especially. And one of those big issues is the way the Church of God handles politics and political issues. And the fact that when we get real explicit or taking a side of a political issue, there can be some racial undertones depending on how we handle certain things. Kennard, do you want to speak a bit about that? I know it's something we've talked about in the past.
Yeah, I'm under the biblical understanding that, there's rare cases where we should get involved, like, say, for instance, that in Columbus, Ohio, they want to put pornography bookstores all over the place. And that's an extreme example, but I'm just trying to make myself clear. And we are to vote whether or not that's supposed to happen. I'll be one of the first ones voting, okay? In that situation, no, okay? So that's cool. But as far as who's going to be the president and going back, it just turns me off. It's not. I looked at the political debate between Kennedy and Nixon. It was so you should take a look at it if you haven't. They were so respectful of one another, healthy debating. Today, it's slandering, it's putting people down and getting their skeletons out of the closet type of conversations. And it just turns me off as not of God. So with that said, I don't think it's something that we need to focus on as God's people, the political landscape at this point.
I more mean also, like, for example, when I know the last handful of years, especially, there have been a lot of racial tensions in the news.
Mm-hmm.
And you have experiences where, because whether it's BLM movement, what was going on with Kaepernick for a long time,
yes.
Even certain things regarding police overreach, that you don't even need to agree with someone's conclusion. But I think the Church of God has tended to be overly dismissive of certain things.
Yes.
And I know, talking with Black brethren in particular in the church, there was a woman who's probably around my age, maybe a little bit older, but she has a young son, and the son asked her, and this is not an uncommon experience to my knowledge, is what happens, like, I'm afraid to get pulled over by the cops. Now, whether you think that's a media creation or it's real, like, you have to understand it's a reality for a
Yes,
segment
it is.
of the brethren,
Yeah.
that's a fear. And I think we can, when we are so politically driven, which I think the Church of God unfortunately has become, at least in certain corners, you wind up accidentally, at best, creating this feeling that, like, well, my experience as a Black or Latino person, or whatever other ethnicity we're talking about, is somehow something I can't talk about because I'm in the vast minority of thinking on the subject. So more in terms of that, I guess. Like, maybe James, if you want to speak to it. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that from that political perspective, when the pressure in the church was going on, I mean, everybody saw sometimes what affects the world will creep into the church, right? So I think during that period of time when we were going through these political issues, and some people were saying we should talk about, not talk about it, but people were expressing on social media. I was quite surprised at some things I saw, like, people like, you got to stop the borders, and, the people coming from Mexico, and, but they were very, very upfront about it, and I was a little bit surprised. So I think there was pressure like that brought into the church. I want to speak to this point also from this perspective: what affects the world and what affects the church. During this period of time when this was happening, we're talking now in the 2000s, just within the last couple of years. After Sabbath services, I was dressed in a suit. I was in Walnut Creek, California, walking across the street, and I hear somebody yelling, have some tortillas, have some tortillas, literally, as I'm crossing. And all of a sudden I look to the right, and they threw corn tortillas and hit my shoulder. I
Oh
know
my
that sounds
goodness.
ridiculous, right? And they fell to the ground, and I look over, and it was like these 3 college-age students in a Mustang facing a light. And I look over, and the people coming the other direction too were like in shock. And I was thinking, I realized what happened. Now, I'll be honest with you. I did come up to the vehicle and speak to the gentleman inside the vehicle, told him that wasn't a good idea. I expressed my thoughts. I really did. And, they were a little bit frightened at first, trying to have the Christian approach. But at the moment, I was really hurt and angry. I'm thinking, here we are. Look what the time we're at. And I've got guys throwing tortillas in. So I think there was a lot of political pressure and racist things going on outside the church. But when I would see it on social media sometimes too, I would think, are you brethren really being considerate? I remember hearing a very good sermon from
Consider it's the good
John
word.
Elliott, and it was called "How Do We Treat the Foreigner?" And it was to your guys' point earlier. It's like we're to treat them like family, people within our church and people outside of the bounds that step into it, right? So that came back to my mind also. But that was some of my experience during that period of time, politically speaking, and people in the church were putting on hats for presidents, and I was just sad to see that turmoil, but it did creep into the church a little bit. I think so too.
Yeah, and I think what the three of us talked about, but I think Kennard, you and I in particular might have, but I know to continue on this issue, a common phrase is to lament, America is going down the wrong path. I wish it was like it was back in the day. Usually some sort of vague statement about back in the day. People usually don't give a time span.
Right.
But I don't think that statement's inherently racist or anything, but you have to understand how that comes across to folks. And you have to understand how not only insensitive, but also like off base it is, because you are being very self-focused when you say that. Because what you're saying is, okay, I don't lament I don't like whatever homosexuality being prevalent and transgenderism and progressive policies, whatever. So I grew up in the 50s or 60s when this stuff was great. Like, okay, but you can't just cherry pick what existed and what didn't, because also you wouldn't be able to fellowship with a good chunk of your brethren if in the 1950s and 60s, like there would be legal issues. You wouldn't be able to go to a restaurant together. Like there was real oppression, and to make that statement so flippantly disregards the human reality that was the case. And I think to the church's credit, back in the day, we were pretty good at emphasizing mankind can't govern itself. We will not have any hope until Christ returns and God's government's in place. Whereas I think we've leaned a bit to political sides lately, and I think the racial component is a unfortunate side effect where there's a lot, you get some racial animus because of that, not necessarily intentionally, but it causes that. And I've also heard anecdotally, and this is probably a topic for another day, but brethren overseas, whether it is South America, Africa, Australia, Europe, doesn't matter, any other nation, what they have, the feedback, which has almost been universal, is we don't really relate to the material that you all put out in terms of like print material and a lot of the public facing stuff, because it's so American politics heavy. It's like it's very focused on the social climate in America, the political climate in America. The talking points are similar, when in reality we should be speaking to the universal condition of man and the problems facing mankind, right? Tremendous human physical advancement, but appalling human evil. And one of those appalling human evils is racism and bigotry. So I think that's something we could work on as a community. But Kennard, do you have any thoughts
Yeah,
on
I wanted to add,
on?
for those who don't understand what Jim Crow is, educate yourself on it. I recently did, I kind of minored in Black studies, but I didn't go into detail about it. And it was horrible. It was horrible for Black Americans. But let me talk to, about my Latino brethren. They've been persecuted. Asians have been persecuted. So it's not just a Black thing. There's unfortunately, again, this satanic, you're different than me, then I'm going to treat you differently type of sentiment exists in this world and in this country. And we got to repent of that. And another thing I wanted to add in regards to Blacks, my experience about Blacks, I forgot to mention, but it's very important. What I spoke to someone else that's a part of the Splint churches, and they told me that several of the Blacks in the South, they stuck with it when that happened, when the apostasy happened back in 1995. And so they stuck with the original teachings by the Worldwide Church of God. But my experience in the northern part of the United States, in particular in Illinois, a lot of them left and they went back to the Sunday churches. So I just thought I would add that in there, and perhaps you can do some further research on why that has happened. Yeah. And another thing I wanted to mention, I've talked to some Black individuals. They're open to talking to white women and so forth, but they have not been able to make any progress. So that's the reason why they may go and pursue Black women, because of that. So I just wanted to mention that. It's not because they don't want to explore that option. It's just that there's no reciprocation in regards to that based on their experience. Those are the ones that I've spoken to. It may be the opposite from what you've experienced, but that's just based on my experience. So.
No, I'm pretty universally, my peers too. I think it depends, again, so much of it's dependent on where you're located, the group you're with the minister and whatnot. And you can have very different experiences within the same organization, a couple towns apart. So we're trying not to paint a universal brush, but it does still happen, I guess.
In certain areas, that's all, right? So
yeah,
it wasn't that all the Blacks just left. I said that before. I was wrong about that. It's just that in certain areas they did. I know in my area they did, in other areas they didn't. So, but there's the truth of the matter is not that many minorities.
I know some folks who my family was close with who went with the changes, and not a small amount of them cite unresolved pain around the race issue as one of the motivating factors. And again, I know that's no excuse for abandoning truth, but I think we want to remove unnecessary stumbling blocks from people, and we don't want to. I mean, conversion is hard enough as it is. Life throws enough at you. There's no reason for us to arbitrarily add more that burden. But I think to migrate to conclude here to desired outcomes and solutions would be helpful.
Sure.
I know in my experience, a first step I would say talk to someone about it. And I know I could be super awkward for folks. I don't get awkward that much or around many things, but for the average person to broach an issue like, hey, I want to hear your story. What was it, from a perspective of someone of your particular ethnicity or race, like, tell me what maybe I don't understand or a perspective I haven't heard, like encourage your friends to open up to you about that is a good place to start. But maybe Kennard first, and then James, what would you say some areas we could progress in are? What solutions would you like to see?
You want me to start first, or?
Yeah.
Okay. I've quoted scripture before. Just worried. I'm gonna do it again. This time I'm gonna get it right. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 25. It states that we should all have the same care for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And another scripture I want to add, Acts 17, verse 26. We all come from one blood. My blood, when I cut it, is red. You cut it is red. Because the oxygen hits is blue originally, but when the oxygen hit it, then it turns red. So that's the way we all come from one blood. So we got to all start acting like that. I'm saying that as nice as I can. We have to start believing those scriptures. Those scriptures are there. And then we talked about Black representation as far as leadership. That's certainly a work in progress. I hope that those who listen to this take it serious and work on that. And then we, as far as I know, some of the organizations, they have budgets where they could market to certain minorities to bring them more into the churches. I know I try to do it with my little budget, but I don't have millions of dollars to do it, and that's something that I'm sure, I know whoever listens to this, they know who I'm talking to. You have the budget to be able to do that, to bring in more minorities, because God wants a mixture. He wants to say, has mixed multitude in the wilderness. He wants it to, in the spiritual wilderness today, he wants that mixed multitude as well. And so that's something that I think in a succinct way provide solutions there. But it all starts with us having the same care for one another. That's the foundation.
A fantastic point, because I think one of the things, and again, human beings in general just do this for anything, right? Like I was talking to someone about doing work overseas in the church, and how there are complications within this one particular nation, even though they're the same race and ethnicity, but one's from a town up north and the other's from a town in the south, and there's a lot of animosity. So we do everything in our power to build barriers between people. But in the church, not only the same care across race, but I think we could do a better job across generations. There isn't as much mixing across generations as I know I would like to see. I just listened to a message yesterday from one of the groups about the need for more of that. I completely agree with. I think obviously Church of God Network is big into having the same love for one another across organizations. I just think bringing down arbitrary barriers is helpful, whether it's race, organization, generation, provided we're all in the same body, right? We're not saying go to your Catholic church and start looking at every single person that like they're in the body of Christ right now. But we have to have a particular orientation to folks within the body in the same love for one another. And even when we look outwardly, we should be looking at people as future potential sons and daughters of God. So I agree wholeheartedly that at the core, it's truly seeing one another as equals. James, what do you think?
Locally, where I attend in the Bay Area, because I live both in London and the Bay Area of California, but in the Bay Area, actually, churches are working with each other. They really are. They're interacting. Locally, we have a young minister. He's great at promoting togetherness, fellowship. So there's things are coming in place. But what I'd like to see in the future, if we can, I think what helps the healing is that you can talk to us about it. Don't make it uncomfortable, like, oh, we can't talk. It really existed. Just like if there was another type of thing someone else needed to heal from, some kind of hurt, you want to be able to talk about it. You just don't want to bury it and act like it wasn't there, it didn't happen. Because if you face it with each other as brethren, you say, okay, culturally speaking, you're hearing me, you're listening to me. We're both of God, we're his children. But at the same time, you need to hear where there's just something a little unfair. So feel okay about speaking to us about it. And if we can voice it to you, then maybe you can take a different perspective on what we're trying to say. Nobody's here to speak, in a wrong manner. We're just here to talk in love regarding that. So I think some of the things will help in the future. As I said, a little more representation in the magazines would be helpful. People of different colors in there. I think sermons, given by a mixture of people, and also council of elders. I know this is a little hard to say this, but if you have a mixture of being represented, then you feel like you're still a bigger part of that church. And I think we'll see growth in that area if it's promoted also in that way, that we're open to everyone. So that's my kind of end perspective on it, and I hope that everybody sees that this is given in love, and we're reaching out, and we're just saying we've been through some things that have been very hurting, even spiritually, hurt your spiritual life, because you feel like, well, am I really that less? Am I different? Is God trying to let me know that, yeah, you're okay to hear, but then right here it stops for you? So look
Yeah.
at it from that perspective, and look at us reaching out for love, and look at us reaching out for healing.
To your point, it's a type of type of gaslighting, because you're not seeing the love of God shown when you're being separated in any way based on race or any sort of dividing line. If we treat people differently because they're part of a different organization, racially or whatever the dividing line is, we experience to an extent God in our relationship with him and his word through interacting with brethren. And so when you have these negative experiences, it could be, the hurt could be magnified. And I like your point, James, that it really is no different than anyone who's gone through something particularly difficult. We've been scheduled to have a podcast with a woman who lost her daughter. And the idea of extreme, like, trauma, people who have suffered loss, very early death, traumatic death. One of the things people lament universally is that people don't know how to talk to them about it. And so when people do come over, usually the conversation isn't productive, or the statement isn't productive, or it's sort of like dismissive, like they just want to get past it because it's an awkward conversation. But I think folks who've gone through it really want to have meaningful discussion on it. Again, whether it is the racial experience, whether it is loss, whether it's an accident that's left you paralyzed, or dealing with cancer, right? Like all these things, mental health issues is another big one, addiction. It's important that we don't disincentivize talking about these things, because these are the core elements of the human experience. They're sources of pain, but also potential sources of a lot of growth and a lot of connectedness when we can talk about these things. Like they're intimacy builders. So I appreciate you two coming on and talking about this openly. I'm sure this is just the first of a number of conversations we're going to have on this topic. This is definitely not one of those one and done types of issues. This is something that has to be a consistent conversation. There's so much to dig into, but I really appreciate you gentlemen coming on and sharing your experiences and being honest with everyone. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having us, and I hope that all our brethren receive this in love and just concern. Thank you.
Right. I just want to say this, that, in the scriptures, it states it's not good for man, and that Hebrew word for that is Adam, mankind, to be alone. And so even the Surgeon General had a recent report that he wrote about the seriousness of people in this country being alone. And we're the Church of God, we're the people of God, and certainly in the church, we should have solutions to solve that being alone, whether you want to get married, or you just want to have friends, or you just want to have a family environment. So that's something that we certainly are equipped to solve. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Take care.